Serious. People who have lived on a supposedly haunted house, what was your scariest supernatural encounter? What was it like? I lived in a 110-year-old farmhouse out in the middle of the country about 20 minutes from any sort of town a few years ago. I was living with my parent who was renting it while their other house was being built, divorce, and I was going to start grad school the following semester. This house was well known for being haunted, but my dad never believed in any of that stuff. When I moved in, I knew that this place was seriously messed up. This place had a recorded 6 deaths on the property, sickness farming accidents since the time it was constructed. Everyone that had ever lived there heard or saw something. The previous owner went crazy drinking himself to sleep in the basement, and the one before that committed suicide. Rethinking this place honestly makes me sound insane. I stayed here, but I had nowhere else to go. The first time I noticed something was a few days after moving in. I was washing dishes. The sink was right below a window where you could look outside in the driveway and the door leading into the garage. My dog was barking outside, so I figured my dad had just got off work and was coming inside because he got home around the same time every day. I saw someone walk into the side garage door, and I could have sworn on my life that it was my dad, so I didn't panic. However, no one came into the house after a few minutes, so I went outside calling his name, and no one was there. No car, nobody. My dad drove in the driveway a few minutes later. I figured at the time my eyes were playing tricks on me. The longer I lived there, the more used to things I got. The dog would always bark at walls in the middle of the night, and this is a well-trained hunting dog. There was an entire upstairs that absolutely nobody stayed in because it was terrifying up there. Smelled terrible, small, and something was off with it, like it wasn't very welcoming. Daily and nightly, you would hear running footsteps upstairs that sounded like 2 kids chasing each other. At any time of the day, you would hear someone whistling outside and always the same tune, or a woman laughing outside. The worst parts always seemed to happen when I was there alone. On top of the extreme isolation, this place was terrifying. One night I was there alone because I had to work a Saturday and my dad went out of town. I woke up in the middle of the night and heard talking. Almost like a mumbling TV in the other room kind of thing. Waking up groggy, I didn't think much of it until after a minute or so I remembered, wait, I'm here alone. I tried to make out what they were saying, but I couldn't understand it. So I opened my door and grabbed my shotgun and yelled, "Who the fleeb is here?" Dead silent. Closed my door, went back to my bed thinking to myself I was half crazy. I lay down and without skipping a beat, the talking starts again. So I bolt up and search the house. Nothing, dead empty, the dog sleeping out in her kennel. I go back to my room a third time, and it starts again. At this point, I knew I was crazy or that was a ghost. After that, I slept with earplugs, TV, fans, you name it. I had 1 month left in the house before we moved to my dad's new place. On the last week or so I lived there, I was in the kitchen making supper when there was a knock on the door. Keep in mind, this place is 20 minutes from any sort of town. It was dark, so I see a silhouette of someone standing out there, so I go and answer it. Open the door, nothing. The most scared I've ever been in my life. I shut the door, grab the trusty shotgun again and call my dad. I told him, I think someone is messing with me or is here right now. Someone knocked on the door and no one was there. He said he was on his way home, but that was 40-ish minutes away. A few minutes later my dog starts barking, then I hear knocks on multiple windows. At this point I was cowering down in the corner of the room, never having felt crippling fear like I was feeling. Then the running upstairs, and I finally yelled, "Leave me the fleeb alone." Then it just stopped. My dad got home, I told him the story, and he didn't believe me. We moved out a few days later and I couldn't have been more relieved. I think I am more scared now looking back on how I stayed in a place like that without realizing how messed up it was. But when people have nowhere to go, they adapt. I think a major part of the fear was the extreme isolation. Being on a 15-acre property with no neighbors, town, or friends nearby was draining. During this whole time, my dad always said he never experienced anything. The day after we moved out he finally admits that something was wrong with that place because he would always hear whistling. Finally, admitting to it. My childhood home was haunted. I grew up in an emotional place. My mom had NPD and my sister had been diagnosed with bipolar and meth-induced psychosis. I was abused, neglected and stressed out. So maybe negative energy draws demons, or maybe I was crazy at the time. My dog would often bark at the Ouija board. I'd often wake up hearing music and conversation in the living room, only to find that there wasn't anyone there. Very often I would hear a baby cry and be too terrified to investigate. One day, I had some friends over. I told them the place was haunted and one of them said, "Let's call the devil." Before I even had a chance to respond, an unbelievably loud and guttural growl came from my television set. The girl who wanted to call the devil pissed herself and never came back to my house again. Other friends would often see large birds flying over my house at night. I only had one friend brave enough to stay with me, even after having witnessed some of this. Well, the most terrifying part of this story happened when I was home alone, very late one night. I was talking on the phone with my brave friend when I suddenly felt sick. I saw my recently deceased grandma's reflection in the glass of the back door. I was very scared and frankly upset. It looked like her, but it wasn't. I went to my bedroom and began to hear scraping, like knuckles dragging on the walls. It was circling the entire bedroom, going round and round. Faster and faster. My friend offered to come over, and I said yes please. By this point I was crying. Just as he got to the front yard, he described hearing footsteps and seeing rocks moving in the front yard, but no one was there. As I went to grab the door to open it, my hairbrush flew directly at my face. Everything went silent after that. I tried to go to my friend's house after that incident. If I went, the house would be empty. I was in middle school at the time. As I got older, things did calm down, but I still had a terrible sense of dread, anger and sadness. My life didn't really start until I got into a happier home and stopped talking to my mom and sister. So maybe I was crazy, but my friends saw things too. I lived in a house that was built in the 1950s and didn't seem to be very updated. The house, I don't think was haunted, but the detached garage sure as heck was. My buddy and I had a gaming setup out there. Keep in mind, this garage is super messy. We had a couch and a TV with my PS2 in the middle of the mess. One night while we were playing games, I heard a woman talking and her 3 kids running around laughing at 3 a.m. I looked over at my friend, and he was like, "WTF was that?" We both just kind of convinced ourselves that it must have been from the game. So we continued to play. Pretty soon we heard it again. So I paused the game and we both listened. Didn't hear anything for a good 2 minutes. Sure enough, we hear the lady talking to her kids and all of them laughing again. We both freaked out because who in the world would be out at 3 a.m. next to our garage with their kids? So we both had to crawl over all the crap in the garage to see who it is. When we opened up the door, nobody was there. We both sprinted back inside the house and checked periodically for anyone outside. A couple days or so goes by. I was bored and my friend was busy at the time, so I decided to go out into the garage by myself to play games. Sure enough, I hear the same thing again with the kids and the mom, but this time the door started shaking. I immediately froze. Then there was hard banging on the door. At this point, my body went into fight or flight mode. I always told myself that if I was ever caught in a supernatural situation, I wouldn't try to be sneaky. If this thing wants to kill me, it better do it right now. So I jumped out from the couch, leaped over all the crap in the garage and sprinted towards that door, blasting through it. I sprinted towards the house without looking anywhere around me. When I made it through the door, I vowed to never go out into that garage again during late hours. Oh, and when I went inside, I realized I stepped on a nail. My adrenaline was pumping so hard I didn't even feel it. I've posted this story before. My grandfather, his sister, and his wife, my grandmother, all died in the same year. The 3 of them were very close. My grandfather was the last to die, a week after his 88th birthday in November. He died in our house, he was living with us. Shortly after he died, my mom, these were her parents and her aunt, started finding pennies in random places all over the house, and upon closer inspection, all the pennies were from the years 1925, 1929, and 1923. These were the birth years of my grandfather, grandmother, and great-aunt. Then I started finding pennies in random places. Sometimes I would get a feeling I might find one, and then I would find one. My mom and I started finding them in Christmas decorations that had been put up after my grandfather died. My mom found some in the attic above the house. The pennies stopped popping up after Christmas. Then the next couple years around Christmas time, my mom started to find more pennies. I think this went on for 2 or 3 Christmas times after my grandfather died. My grandfather loved Christmas time. Then slowly stopped. My mom still has all the pennies. She almost filled a coffee mug with them. When I was growing up, my grandfather always claimed to be somewhat clairvoyant. He had died and been brought back to life a couple times in the hospital, and he had claimed to see the ghost of his mother, who died when he was 6. He also had several other paranormal experiences in his life. He was a little eccentric and always joked that he was going to haunt us after he died. I'm aware that it's common for people to see things when they first wake up, hypnopompic hallucinations, I think it's called. But seeing figures in my room in the middle of the night wasn't a rare thing for me, and on many occasions, others saw the same thing I had too. One story that comes to mind is when an ex-girlfriend of mine was sleeping over for the week. I am also a girl, if that helps add mental imagery for anyone. Anyway, I woke up at some point in the middle of the night and something just felt wrong. Normally I try to keep my eyes closed if I wake up at an unfavorable hour, but something in my head kept telling me to scan the room, so I did. At the end of my bed was what looked like a tall man. I couldn't make out much of him, other than the fact he was a tall shadow-like human figure. Despite lacking detail though, I was absolutely sure someone was standing there. I stared at the figure for a solid few seconds before comprehending how terrifying the situation was. Once I had realized though, I closed my eyes and pressed my head into my girlfriend's chest, hoping the thing would just go away. That's when my girlfriend spoke. "You see him too?" I had no idea she was awake. To this day I have no idea what woke us both at the same time. The second she spoke, my head shot up and we looked at each other for a solid second before turning back to the figure. It was still there. I rubbed my eyes and turned away again while she threw the blanket over her head. I looked back after rubbing my eyes and it was still there. My girlfriend never looked up again. I'm not even sure how it disappeared because after seeing it for a third time, I hid under the blankets with her. All I know is that by the time we composed ourselves enough to look out from the blankets again, it was gone. Now I know people could say it was probably a shadow of something else in my room, but for nights after this incident, we tried to recreate shadows that could even slightly mimic what we saw and came up with absolutely nothing.